What if the first mistake she made in a strange new town led her straight into the arms of the one man she should have feared the most? The sun over Copper Creek burned like a hot iron, turning the air into a wavering sheet of heat. Eleanor Vance stepped down from the rattling stagecoach, her legs shaking after the long journey from the east. Dust covered her dress, her gloves, even her tongue. Everything about this town tasted like dust. The buildings were worn, sun-bleached, and tired, as if the land itself had taken all their strength. Eleanor clutched her small satchel close to her chest. Inside it were her father's Bible, her teaching papers, and the letter that had brought her here. Copper Creek needed a schoolteacher. She needed a new life. It felt simple when she read it on paper. Standing here, under this merciless Texas sun, nothing felt simple at all. The driver pointed her toward the Silver Spur boarding house. She walked through the busy main street, her city shoes slipping on the uneven ground. Men tipped their hats with curious eyes that made her cheeks warm. She looked like something blown in from another world, her dark dress buttoned up tight to her throat and her hair pinned neatly under her hat. The Silver Spur looked as worn as everything else. When she stepped inside, the room smelled of old wood and bacon grease. Mrs. Jenkins, the owner, stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes taking in every inch of Eleanor. With barely a word, she handed over a key. "Room 7. Second door on the left," she said. The key felt heavy in Eleanor's hand as she climbed the narrow stairs. The hall upstairs was dim, lit only by a weak light through a dirty window. She found the second door on the left. The number plate was crooked and hard to read, but she was too tired to care. She slid the key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a loud scrape that echoed in the still hallway. Inside, the room smelled of leather, horse, and something faintly smoky. Not the smell she expected for a lady's room. A pair of mud-caked boots stood near the bed. A gun belt hung over a chair. A heavy unmade bed took up most of the wall. She froze. This was not her room. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed her trunk, trying to drag it back out the door before anyone found her, but she was too late. A door she hadn't noticed, a connecting door, swung open. He stepped through it. A tall man with damp hair, a towel in his hands, and a shirt hanging open across a chest, carved by long days under the sun. His sleeves were rolled, showing strong arms marked by work and weather. He stopped when he saw her. For one full heartbeat, neither of them moved. Eleanor felt like her soul left her body. She stood trembling, wide-eyed, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. A minister's daughter had no business standing in the room of a half-dressed cowboy. His blue eyes moved from her face to the trunk she had dragged inside. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He was amused. Slowly he lowered the towel, his lips curving into a rough-edged smile that reached his eyes. That smile almost knocked the air out of her. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his wide chest. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gritty, deep enough to vibrate in the air. "I guess heaven must have sent you to me." Her heart stopped. Her breath stopped. Everything stopped. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her dry throat. She stammered an apology, staring at the floor, explaining she had been told room 7 and the number looked wrong in the dim hallway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tease her. He just watched her with that quiet, unreadable expression that made her even more nervous. Then he moved. He stepped forward, so close she could smell the sun and sweat and dust on him, and lifted her trunk with one hand as if it weighed nothing. Eleanor felt her breath catch again. He carried it out into the hallway without a word. She hurried after him, her face burning hotter than the Texas sun. He stopped in front of the next door, the real room 7, and set the trunk down gently. "This one's yours. Numbers get mixed up," he said. Before she could thank him, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a lamp that cast long shadows down the hallway. She looked at the scene with those sharp eyes of hers. "So you met Mr. Callahan," she said in a flat voice. "Your room's right next to his." Eleanor felt her stomach twist. The cowboy's room, right next to hers. He gave her a short nod, then disappeared into his own door without another look. That night, The walls felt too thin. She heard his boots drop to the floor, the low creak of his footsteps, even a quiet murmur she couldn't make out. Sleep refused to come. Every sound reminded her she was living beside a stranger, a man the town whispered about, a man who had lived through things she could only imagine. But she had come to Copper Creek for a purpose. She told herself she would be brave, she would stand tall, she would teach the children and prove she belonged here. Yet as she lay awake, hearing the wind howl outside and the faint sounds of the cowboy next door, one fear whispered louder than the rest. What if this man, this mistake, was only the first step into a life she did not understand? What if the one man she feared was the only man willing to stand beside her when the whole town turned against her? Eleanor had thought her biggest challenge in Copper Creek would be the schoolhouse. She soon learned she was wrong. The town did not trust outsiders. The older boys pushed her, the mothers whispered. And every time she walked down the street, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. But the hardest part was Luke Callahan. He was everywhere without ever speaking a word to her. He passed her in the hallway with a quiet nod, his boots heavy on the worn floorboards. She saw him in town, loading supplies onto his wagon with slow, powerful movements. She heard the low rumble of his voice through the thin walls at night. She never understood the words, just the tone. Tired, lonely, and so full of pain it made her heart twist. The town whispered about him too. They said he kept to himself for a reason. They said he had seen things in the war that turned his heart to stone. They said he had loved once, and the world had taken that love from him. Eleanor did not believe half of what people said, but she believed the sorrow. She felt it every time she heard him moving next door. Still, she tried to focus on her work. She stood tall in front of the cracked blackboard. She kept her voice steady when the boys questioned her. She never let the hard stares shake her. Slowly, the class began to change. The younger children looked at her with trust. Even Thomas, the oldest boy, watched her with something different in his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but less defiance than before. But Copper Creek was a hard place. And hard places do not break easily. One afternoon, the sky changed. The bright blue faded into a deep purple. The wind began to scream as if warning everyone to run. Eleanor hurried the children through their lessons, but the storm struck before she could dismiss them. Thunder shook the small building. The walls rattled. Rain slammed the windows like handfuls of thrown stones. The younger children cried. Eleanor kept her voice calm, moving from one to the next, offering comfort. After the storm passed, she sent the children home and began to clean the room. That was when she saw it, a dark stain spreading across the ceiling. A slow drop of water fell, then another. Her heart sank. A leaking roof was no small problem for a school that barely stood to begin with. She was standing on a bench, poking the boards with a broom handle, when the door opened. Luke Callahan stood in the frame. He held a rope over one shoulder and a hammer in his hand. His clothes were damp from the storm. His hair clung to his forehead, but his blue eyes, steady and sharp, took in the leak with a single glance. "That storm hit hard," he said. Eleanor climbed down from the bench, brushing dust from her skirt. She explained about the roof, trying not to sound as defeated as she felt. Luke didn't answer. He didn't ask permission. He didn't offer comfort. He walked past her, dropped the rope, looked up at the ceiling, and nodded once. Then he left. Eleanor stood there, utterly confused. Had he come just to state the obvious? She shook her head and went back to moving desks. It wasn't until she heard a scraping sound outside that she understood. Luke had brought a ladder. He was climbing onto the roof. He worked for the rest of the afternoon. The steady beat of his hammer echoed across the empty prairie, a strong, sure rhythm that brought a strange peace to her chest. Eleanor tried to prepare lessons, but her eyes kept drifting to the ceiling, listening. When the sun dipped low, the hammering stopped. He came down the ladder wearing a coat of dust and sweat. His face was tired. His hands scraped raw. "It'll hold," he said. "For now." She tried to thank him, but the words felt too small. When she offered to pay, he shook his head. He turned to leave. Eleanor called after him, asking why he had helped her. He stopped in the doorway. The wind pushed at his shirt, and for a moment he looked like a man caught between two worlds, the one behind him and the one he didn't know how to enter. His voice was low. "A leaky roof is no place to learn." Then he walked away. Word spread through Copper Creek faster than brush fire. Luke Callahan had spent the day fixing the schoolhouse roof. The new schoolteacher had been alone with him. People whispered. They watched her with new, sharper eyes. Eleanor kept her head high, but inside, a storm churned. She had not asked for his help. She had not asked for the town's judgment either. But the worst came days later, in the town meeting. Jedediah Morrison, the richest rancher in the county, stood before the entire town and spoke about the school. He said Eleanor was unfit, too delicate, too Eastern, too soft. Then he spoke about land, specifically Luke Callahan's land, which he wanted but could not have. He never said Luke's name. He didn't need to. Every eye turned toward the silent cowboy standing in the back of the room. Luke stood with arms folded, his face unreadable. Eleanor felt something hot rise in her chest. Anger, for the school, for Luke, for herself. And she stood. Her voice was steady as she defended her classroom, her students, and the rights of a man being cornered by greed. She spoke with a courage she did not know she had. When she finished, the room was silent. Dead silent. Then the whispers began. She had spoken for Luke. She had taken his side. She had thrown herself into the fire. Her reputation crumbled in a single night. By morning, the whole town knew. The schoolteacher wasn't just living next to Luke Callahan. She was his. And soon, something far worse would happen. Something that would put her life in danger and force Luke to choose between losing her or saving her in a way no one in Copper Creek would forget. What if the fire meant to destroy her became the moment that bound her life to his forever? The day of the fire began like any other. The wind was restless, scraping dust across the prairie, rattling the schoolhouse windows. Eleanor tried to teach long division, but the older boys were distracted. Even Thomas kept glancing at the door as if sensing something coming. The smell reached them first, sharp and wrong. A thin line of gray smoke curled under the storage room door. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. She clapped her hands, her voice strong and calm. She ordered the children into a line. No running, no pushing. They obeyed, their faces pale. She counted them as they hurried outside, but one was missing. Samuel. The little boy who hid when scared. Her stomach dropped. She called his name, coughing as smoke thickened around her. She found him in the cloakroom, crying into a pile of coats. She grabbed him and ran for the door. The fire had already swallowed the exit. The heat hit her like a wall. The roof cracked above her. Smoke filled her lungs. The only other way out was the small window, too high, too tight. She smashed it with a bench, and glass shattered everywhere. But before she could lift Samuel through it, the fire roared, choking her breath. She sank to her knees, Samuel clinging to her neck, and then the wall exploded inward. A dark figure pushed through the flames, Luke. His face was streaked with soot, but his eyes were wild with one thing. Fear for her. He took Samuel first, handing him to the men outside, and then he turned back for her. She felt his arms around her, strong and sure. The world tilted, spinning into black, and the last thing she felt was the cold rush of night air as he carried her out. When she woke, she saw firelight dancing over the collapsed schoolhouse. Mrs. Jenkins was at her side. The town doctor leaned over her. Then she heard shouting. Jedediah Morrison. He stood on a wagon bed, pointing down at Luke, accusing him of starting the fire. Eleanor tried to rise, but her body was too weak. Her voice was gone. Morrison claimed someone saw Luke near the school earlier. He said Luke was bitter, dangerous, capable of anything. The sheriff moved toward Luke. Eleanor tried to scream, but only a rasp escaped. Luke didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He stood with his hands at his sides, his face calm, resigned, as if he expected the world to take everything from him. Just like before, they jailed him that night. Eleanor lay awake in her bed as the town gathered to judge him. Her lungs hurt with every breath. Mrs. Jenkins begged her to rest. But Eleanor knew the truth. If she stayed silent, Luke would hang. She pulled on her dress and walked into the cold night, coughing with every step. People stared as she entered the packed town hall. Morrison was speaking, full of smooth lies. Luke stood in chains, eyes fixed on the floor. Eleanor stepped forward. Her voice was raw, barely a whisper, but the room fell silent. She told them everything, the night of the blizzard, the darkness, her fear, and how she had stumbled into Luke's room, how he had given her blankets, his fire, his floor to sleep on, how he had shown her more honor than anyone in that room. She sacrificed her reputation, the last thing she owned, to save him. Her words cut through the hall like a knife. Someone confessed the truth. Morrison had paid him to lie. The sheriff turned on Morrison, ripping the rope from Luke's wrists. The crowd shifted, ashamed and angry. Morrison fled the hall, his power broken. Luke didn't move toward the cheering crowd. He moved toward her. His eyes were burning, not with anger, but with a raw, bewildered emotion she didn't dare name. But by the next morning, he was gone. Eleanor saw him riding west, his horse steady, a pack mule behind him. He was leaving to save her from more shame. And she ran. She ran past the burnt schoolhouse, past the edge of town, across the wide, brown prairie, with nothing but the wind beside her. She called his name, but the wind stole her voice. Finally, he stopped. He watched her approach with a look of pain deeper than any wound. He told her he was leaving so she could start fresh, that she deserved a life without scandal, that she didn't deserve to be tied to a man like him. Eleanor stepped closer, her breath shaking. She told him he was wrong. She told him she didn't want a quiet, empty life. She told him the truth that had lived in her chest since the night of the storm. "In that dark room, I stopped being afraid," she said softly. "I found my home, and it wasn't the lamp or the fire, it was you." Luke's stoic mask finally broke. The grief, the loneliness, the years of silent hurt, all of it fell away. He stepped forward and gathered her into his arms as if he had been drowning and she was the only breath left in the world. She held him just as tightly, feeling his strength and his shaking and his heart finally beating free. They walked back together, leading the horses, side by side. Months passed. Spring arrived. The town rebuilt the schoolhouse. Luke helped every day, his hammer ringing in the sunlight. Eleanor taught the children in the church hall, her voice steady and sure. Their life came together piece by piece, not rushed, not forced, but chosen. When Luke asked her to marry him, there were no speeches, no grand gestures, just a quiet moment on his ranch, the wild Mustang grazing nearby, the Texas sky endless above them. He said his house had needed her for a long time. She said she wasn't going anywhere. They married on a hill under the open sky, with only the prairie and the wind to witness. Simple, quiet, honest. A new beginning. She had come to Copper Creek a frightened stranger. She became a woman of the West, and she became the woman who taught a broken cowboy how to love again. Their house was no longer his. It was theirs, a place where two lonely souls found the peace they thought they had lost forever.